Over to you, Mandy or Tim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's class, which is the Winsor Newton Cotman apples. My name is Tim DePack, and I am from Winsor Newton. I'll be your moderator today. I'm being joined by Mandy Peltier, who will be your artist instructor for today's class. And Mandy will be taking you through today's class by providing information about the products being used and showing you how to perform some of the watercolor painting techniques and creating these delicious apples using the Winsor Newton Cotman watercolor sketcher box set. She will also give you a sneak peek at some of her upcoming classes, and I will provide the links to you in the chat. So if you wish to sign up for them in advance, you can do so. Also, upon the completion of this class, you will receive a survey in your email. Please let us know what you think about the class, how we did, and if there's any particular topics that you'd like to see Mandy perform in the future classes. Before we begin, we just let you know that there were sketches provided for you, and we can provide that if you did not get it in the link in the chat box on the side. And I'm going to hand it over to Mandy to begin.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Hi, everyone. Like Tim said, I'm Mandy Peltier. I'm really excited to be here today. This class, I believe, was advertised in a Michael's email, and that usually means we have a huge number of participants in the class, which I'm really excited about, but that probably also means a lot of you are newcomers and maybe haven't taken one of my classes before. So I just want to sort of encourage you that if I kind of move at a fast pace today, it's because we only have an hour. And I think today's class is probably a little more intermediate because it involves some color theory and understanding of values. So the great thing is, like Tim said, these classes are recorded. You can watch it again in 24 hours and pauses needed to keep up. So do not be discouraged. If you find today's class a little challenging, you can always just watch today, learn the technique, and then rewatch it on your own time at your own pace and pauses needed to keep up. And I also have a class coming up this Friday that I'll show you about later. And it is a very beginner friendly. So I'd encourage you all to come on Friday as well and check out my class then. So because we only have an hour, I'm going to go ahead and share my other camera so we can get started. And I always start with an overhead view of the supplies. Today's project, I think it's pretty just intuitive in terms of what you would need to paint with watercolor. I'll once again be using the Sketcher's Pocket set. I have paper towels, which is important for blotting our brush. This project only uses one brush, and it's the number 6 Cotman round watercolor brush. I have a pencil and eraser just for sketching the outline. If you have already transferred the outline, then you don't need the pencil and the eraser. I have a glass of water, a smaller palette, and I'm using a sheet of 9x12 Winsor & Newton professional watercolor paper. It looks like this, and you can buy it from the michaels.com website. And I've cut it in half so that I have a 6x9 sheet of paper. You can use the other 6x9 sheet of paper to make this project again, just for further practice. My class that I taught in early August also used a 6x9 sheet of paper. So you can always go back and watch that class and make the blueberries on the other 6x9 sheet of paper when you cut the 9x12 sheet in half. So this is the project we're making today. It is these sort of antique or heritage looking apples. Now, today's class I think is really fun, but it also may be slightly overwhelming because we're only going to use the 3 primary colors today. And we're going to mix all of the colors that you see here, mostly through layering, not by mixing them on the palette. There's going to be one exception to that, but for the most part, we're going to really deep dive into color theory, and like the green you see on the leaves, the dark red, that's going to be done by layering our colors or by even mixing them within the brush itself. All right, so I think this class will be fun, and I think you're going to learn a lot. So we are going to get started by sketching the actual outline for the apples. So I'm going to sort of move things aside that I don't need to sketch the outline. And I'm going to pull in a copy of the outline. This was one of the downloads for this class. And I preferred to reference the actual outline versus the finished painting for this because it just makes it a little easier for me to see what I need to draw. And I'm going to start by drawing a circle that's about the same diameter of this bottom apple. And so I'm going to place it kind of down here towards the bottom of my 6x9 sheet of paper. And I'm not going to try and draw all the edges and this sort of curve at the bottom. I'm just drawing a basic circle that's about the same diameter as what I see here. And we'll shape it and make it look more like what I see on the outline in just a few minutes. So just start with a circle. It's okay if it's not perfect. If you look at an apple, you would say the shape of an apple is a circle, but if you look at the actual edges, no apple is a perfect circle. It has some edges and some smooth lines along the outline of the apple. So the next thing I'm going to draw is the main branch, and the main branch sort of has a subtle S shape to it. And it's two parallel lines that have maybe 1/8 of an inch distance between. So I'm going to draw that subtle S shape, and I'm going to draw a second parallel one that's about 1/8 of an inch apart or so. And just pull that down to that first apple we drew on. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw my other apple. And if you take a look at this apple, part of it is tucked behind that branch we just drew. So go ahead and draw your circle that's about the same diameter and overlap it with the branch, and we'll fix it and make it look more like the outline in a second. For now, just sort of draw the diameter of it, just a circle to kind of match the diameter of what we see on the actual outline. And then I'm going to draw the leaves. So I'm going to draw this top one first. It kind of overlaps the apple just a little bit, but if you don't overlap it, it's fine. So I'm going to draw the stem for the leaf and then just sort of a basic leaf shape. And then I'll paint on some veins for the leaf, and I'll erase the apple part that's showing there. Let's go ahead and draw on the veins. And then I'll draw this other leaf down here with the stem. And then we'll sort of mold and shape those apples to look more like what we see on the outline. Okay, so this bottom apple here, it has sort of a curve along the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of carve and shape my apple, my circle, to look more like what I see on the outline, and then erase anything I don't need. And I'll kind of work the sides as well to look more like the outline. I love starting artists on apples because apples are sort of like snowflakes. No two apples are alike. But when you're done drawing or painting your apple, it's still going to look like an apple, even if it doesn't look exactly like your photo reference. And that's not true for everything. So I love starting people on apples. I think I have made an apple in just about every medium that exists because they're just so fun to create. And this little slight curve here, I'm calling this the indentation of this apple. And then I'll just call this little circle the stamen. Maybe it's the style, but it's the bottom of the apple there. So I'm going to draw this little indentation and then a little oval beneath it. And then I'm going to also shape this top apple. I'm going to start with the top here where we have sort of a curve along the top to kind of make it look a little bit more like what we actually see on the outline here. And then I'll sort of shape the sides. I'm going to do a curve along the bottom. You can always erase if you need. So I normally use like a 6H pencil, and the H stands for hard. And so it's a lighter color lead that doesn't show very much beneath the paint. But I learned early on when I was teaching my classes last year that you can't see it at home with Zoom. So I'm using an F pencil today so that the lead is a little bit darker and you can see it a little better at home. But this is going to be a little bit harder to erase when we're done. So I like to use an H pencil because you can't really see it beneath the paint. And then I don't even have to really worry about erasing the graphite. All right, so I'm also going to draw the indentation on this top apple, and then the stem that sort of touches it, and then connect that stem to the main branch by drawing two parallel lines. There we go. I don't really like how that looks. I'm going to make some adjustments here. And I'm just going to take stock of what I have here, make any other adjustments. I think I'm pretty happy with this. I think this looks pretty good.
I'll let everybody know, Mandy will hold this up when she's done sketching it out so you can see it closer. There you go. When you're done with it, so you can see.
I'm done. Thanks for the reminder.
Okay.
Oh, you know what I didn't do? I didn't put all the veins on this leaf, so I'll just go ahead and throw some of those on. You don't have to do veins. You can just do the leaves a solid color if you want. You don't have to do the veining. But this is the finished outline. So I'm going to go ahead and scooch this aside for a second so we can mix our palette. can put my brush and eraser aside too. All right, so I'm going to bring down my Sketchers pocket set, my little artist palette, my water, my number 6 brush. And so for right now, we are only going to mix the 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And I'm going to talk about color theory in just a couple minutes here. But how I'm going to mix these colors is I'm going to start by placing my dry number 6 brush in the water, and I'm just going to sort of swoosh it around and twirl it around to help those bristles absorb the water. And then I'm going to use my number 6 brush as if it were a spoon, and I'm going to place 3 scoops of water into 3 different wells on my palette, just like this. So I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to do 1 scoop, 2 scoops, 3 scoops. And I'm going to repeat that to the other 2 wells on my palette that I want to put 3 scoops of water into. So this is clean water because we haven't activated any of the half pans yet. And so this will give us something to activate the dry half pans with and turn it into watercolor paint. If you have taken some of my classes before, I generally mix colors that are an equal paint to water ratio, or even slightly more paint than water. Today, though, we're going to do a variety. Because these apples are red, I want the red to be the most dominant thick color. And I've made this by making all of the paints the same ratio, and I think it just works better if we make them different paint to water ratios. So we're going to start with the yellow, and the yellow is going to be more of a wash. So we have 3 scoops of water in here, and I'm just going to do 1 pass of the cadmium yellow into that well. And if you haven't taken one of my classes before, what I mean by a pass is I'm taking my wet brush, I'm going to run it, not daintily, I'm just going to really run it into that cadmium yellow a handful of times. Then I'm going to stir it into those 3 scoops of water, and I'm going to wipe it on the edge of that well, and that's a pass, okay? So just 1 pass of the cadmium yellow. And then for the second well on our palette, we're going to use the ultramarine blue. There's 2 blues in your set. There's ultramarine blue. And if you have the older Sketchers pocket set, it's intense blue. If you have the one that was just released, it's cerulean blue, I believe. So we're going to be using the ultramarine blue. That is the blue that's in whatever Sketchers pocket set you have. And so I'm going to clean my brush real quick, get that yellow off. I'm going to wipe it along the edge of my palette, maybe even blot it a couple times on my paper towel. And for the blue, I'm going to do 4 passes. So I only did 1 for the yellow, but I'm going to do 4 for the ultramarine blue. So I'm going to run my brush into the ultramarine blue half pan, stir, release what's on my brush on the edge of my palette. I'm going to do that 4 times. And so this will give us a pretty equal paint to water ratio, doing 4 passes of the blue into that second well on our palette. And then the third one will receive our last primary color, which is red. And so we'll be using the Alizarin crimson in our set. I want this one to be the most concentrated paint mixture. So we're going to do 6, you can even do 7 if you wanted, 6 or so passes of Alizarin crimson into that third well on your palette. Do make sure your brush is cleaned. Get that blue off, or you're going to make a slight purple color into that third well on your palette. And make 6, 7 passes into that third well on your palette. And then I'm going to talk to you about color theory and show you on a scrap sheet of paper how we're going to be mixing colors today. And I should probably be counting in my head so I don't lose count of the number of passes I'm doing. I believe that was 4. So you can see this is a pretty quick process. You don't have to go slow with this. It's really just trying to get the right ratio of paint to water. You really just want to err on the side of a thicker paint for the red. So each of these were made with the same amount of water, just a different number of passes. All right, so we have yellow, blue, and red are 3 primary colors. All right, so I am going to clean my brush, blot it, move this aside for a second, and I'm going to pull over my color wheel, which if you've taken some of my classes before, you've seen this. If you want to know more about color theory, I taught a class around Mother's Day. It was making Mother's Day cards. And I've talked about color theory, I think, in every class I've taught. I think this is my 18th class I've taught for Winsor, Newton, and Michael Stores. And I think I've touched on it in just about every class, but it was a pretty deep dive on that Mother's Day class if you want to learn a lot about color theory. But we're also going to do it today. So the 3 primary colors, like I said, are yellow, blue, and red. And so this is the color wheel. This is the color spectrum bit into a circle, and it can teach you how to mix colors. So everything that falls in between yellow and blue on the color wheel is mixed by using yellow and blue in differing amounts. So using yellow and blue in equal amounts will give us the secondary color of green, okay? If we mix yellow and green together, or a lot of yellow and just a little bit of blue, since yellow green is closer to yellow on the color wheel, we'll get yellow green. To get blue green, you can mix green and blue, or a lot of blue, since blue green is closer to blue, and a little bit of yellow. The same is true, everything that's between red and blue is mixed by mixing the primaries of red and blue together. Everything that falls in between red and yellow on the color wheel is mixed by mixing red and yellow together in differing amounts. So that's one basic thing you kind of want to keep in mind today. And then the other aspect of color theory that you'll want to keep in mind today is this one: opposites on the color wheel. So when you mix opposites on the color wheel, it does something special. So let's say the opposites of red and green, how they sit opposite of each other on the color wheel. So we know red is a primary, green is a secondary that is mixed by mixing yellow and blue. So red and green are a compilation of all three primary colors. It would be like 2 parts red and 1 part blue and 1 part yellow. Okay, if you were to mix red and green in equal amounts. And if you were to mix red and green together in equal amounts, it'll give you a neutral color, usually a gray. Sometimes it ends up being more brown. Sometimes it looks more black. But that's going to be true for any opposites on the color wheel: yellow and purple, red, orange, and blue, green. Any opposites on the color wheel are just some combination of the 3 primary colors, and mixed in equal parts, they'll give you a neutral color. But if you add an opposite to its opposite in just a small amount, it will de-intensify the color you're adding it to. So adding just a little bit of green to red will de-intensify the red. It will even just darken it a little bit. Adding a little bit of green to red will give it like a darker red color, more of a mulberry color. And adding a little bit of red to green will give you a little bit of a darker green color. It'll just de-intensify the pure shade of green. So this is really important to know today, because we're going to be taking this color theory in mind as we apply our colors. So it is going to be important throughout this project that you know what is on your brush so that you know what will happen when you apply that brush to the paper. Okay, so I have a little scrap sheet of paper so I can do just a quick demo for you of color mixing and how we're going to mix colors today. Okay, so let's say we were going to paint a leaf, and leaves are in this project are green, right? So usually in my classes, I might say add a scoop of water to your well, and we're going to mix green today using the primary colors. So green is made by mixing the primaries of yellow and blue. So in your palette, let's do a pass of yellow, and then let's do a pass of blue into that yellow. And it gives us green, right? But we're not going to mix that way today, with one exception, and I'll tell you when we get there. Today, to mix green, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to add a layer of yellow to our leaf. Okay, a layer of yellow to our leaf. And then we're going to put just the tip of our brush into the blue and go over the yellow with the blue, and watch what happens as the blue paint mixes with the yellow paint. It turns it green. And also what happens is by sort of pushing that blue over the yellow, it mixes the blue and the yellow within the brush. And now what's on our brush is green. Okay, so we're going to be mixing by layering and by what just naturally happens within the brush. And then, like I was telling you about opposites on the color wheel here, pure red, I have another brush here just to show you this. Pure red looks like this. Okay, but I have green on my brush right now from making this leaf here. And then watch what happens if I put just the tip of it into the red and I paint a swatch right next to this red. I'll hold this up so you can see better. Do you see how that darkened the red? It de-intensified it. So that's why it's important to always know what's on your brush. If you don't want it to be a dark red, if you want it to be a pure red, then you'll want to clean your brush before you dip it into the red. But for the most part today, we'll just be dipping the very tip of our brush into the 3 primary colors to influence what goes down on the paper. Okay, so I hope that kind of gives you an idea of how we're going to mix the colors today. Again, this is going to be a fun ride. It's probably going to be new and different for a lot of you. And today we're also going to learn a new technique that I haven't done in any of my classes yet, and that is called dry brushing. I don't know if any of you have used dry brushing before, but I'm going to talk to you about that as well. Okay, but we're not ready for that yet. So we are going to paint these apples in a couple of layers. We're going to do one layer, and then we're going to do dry brushing, and then we're going to do a final layer. And that's going to be true for the apples. Okay, so we're going to start with the first layer for the apples. We're actually today going to start by adding blue. Blue is sort of going to be our dark value today. What I mean by value is the darkness or the intensity of color. How light is the color? How dark is the color? So if I say light value, I mean a really light color, like what you see right in the middle of this apple, or even down here. If I say dark value, I mean a dark color, like what you see on the left side here, or what's right next to the main branch. So values also come into play today. So the blue kind of plays the role of the dark value on this exercise. The yellow is sort of our light value, and the red is sort of our middle value, or just local color, the color you think of when you think of an apple, a red apple anyway. All right, so to help the blue go on a bit less intensely, I'll show you on my scrap sheet of paper here. If I were to just to go in and apply blue on the apple, it goes on pretty bold. But if I were to first wet the paper and then drop on blue, it goes on a little bit lighter, a little bit less intense. Okay, so actually think I need just a little bit more blue in my blue well here, just from that little exercise there. All right, so what we're going to do just for this first layer on both apples is we're actually going to apply water first before we drop paint on top of it, just to help it go on a bit more softly. So we're going to start actually with blue. Normally we'd go from light to dark in terms of values, but today we're actually starting with the dark value. So we're going to apply blue to all the dark values on the apples, but we're going to start with this top apple. So the dark values are sort of middle left here is the bottom of the apple. It's what's just to the left of the main branch and what is just to the right of the main branch. It's also this area right underneath the indentation, and also what is just above the indentation, both to the left and right of the apple's stem. So we want to try and avoid adding water to the actual indentation. We want that to be sort of a highlighted section, okay? So it's going to be middle left, the bottom, both to the left and right of the main branch, just underneath the indentation, and to the left and right of the apple stem. That is where we're going to apply clean water. So let's swish our brush on the water, wipe it a couple times on the edge of the water container. And I'm going to start by applying just water to that middle left section, following the curvature of the apple. You can put more water on your brush as needed. I'm going to apply it to the very bottom of the apple. So there's going to be parts of the apple that don't have water. We're only adding it to the dark sections. I'm going to apply it just what is to the left of the main branch, to that whole section that's to the right of the main branch. I'm going to try not to add any water to the actual indentation, but I'm going to apply a little bit of water just underneath it and then just above it, but not to the apple stem. I know this is a lot of words. If this is overwhelming for you, please rewatch this class tomorrow when it's uploaded to the Michael Store YouTube channel, and you can pause as needed, rewind, re-listen, etc. And then after we have water to our apple, I'm going to put some of that blue on my brush, and I'm going to place paint bloom. So I'm just going to sort of tap it everywhere I placed water and let it sort of bloom out on its own. And then I'll smooth it out in just a second. So I'm just sort of tapping, tapping, tapping everywhere I placed water. And then after I've tapped everywhere, I'll kind of take my brush and just sort of smooth it out with what's left. You might be amazed that this somehow turns out to look like colorful apples. Right now it just looks blue, but it won't.
So we're not in the blueberry class, right? We're in the apples class.
Yes, but it will all come together, I promise. All right. And there might be some parts you don't really need to smooth out with your brush. Only do if you need to. Okay. And now I'm going to swish my brush again. And I'm now going to apply clean water to the parts of the apple that don't yet have paint, other than to the indentation and to the stem. So to the left part here, to the middle, Go ahead and apply clean water there. It's okay if a little bit of that blue bleeds into your water. That's okay. Don't worry about it. It'll all be okay. And then to those parts, I'm going to drop in that yellow. So I'm going to drop yellow in, and don't clean your brush after dropping in the yellow. Okay. Don't clean your brush. Just drop in yellow to the left and to the middle. So we have yellow on our brush. If we were to dip the tip of our brush into the red, just the very tip of it into the red, it's going to mix together and give us a more of an orange color. So I want to apply this now, what will be orange color, where the yellow and the blue meet on the left side. So I'm not going to take it all the way over to the edge. I'm just going to go over where the blue and the yellow meet. And then to this middle section, I'm going to apply it where the blue and red meet on the left side and where the blue and red meet on the right side. And then I can just gently work it into the middle. And you'll see it starts to look more and more orange as it kind of bleeds into the yellow. It can take a little second there for that to happen. As it dries, the colors will continue to morph and to change hue. And then the last step for this first layer is I am going to go over the blue now with just a thin layer of red. So you don't even have to clean your brush. I'm just going to go over the dark blue with some red. Because red is a more concentrated paint mixture, this will look more of like a dark red than a purple. It'll look more like a red violet just because there's more red in the paint mixture than there was when we mixed the blue. And so just it will look somewhat purple in some spots, and that's okay. But just go over all the blue with some red. And the blue should still be a little bit wet to give you something to sort of play into and mix into. So just be real careful. So you can already see from this very first layer, we're trying to already build up some form and some values. We already have some light values. We already have some dark values. It's already starting to take on the look of an apple, even with just this very first layer. Okay. And then we'll be ready to basically repeat this process to the bottom apple. All right. So we're going to start with the bottom apple. If some of you aren't done with the top apple, maybe what you could do today is just work on the top apple, and then you could do the bottom apple after class is over, or when you can rewatch this class when it's uploaded to the YouTube channel. I don't like rushing, but I also don't want to go too far over the allotted time we have. So I'm going to take my water. We started on this apple by applying water to the dark values. So on this bottom apple, we're just going to focus on the part of the apple that is above the indentation. Okay, so we're just focusing on this top part. So I'm going to apply water to the upper left. So what's above the indentation, left half. So I'm going to apply clean water to that. So what's above the indentation to the left half, I'm going to apply clean water. And then I'm going to drop some blue over that section. And then after I've dropped some blue over that section, I can kind of smooth it out.
And you're just going to give you a friendly reminder. It's 1/2 just so you know.
Thank you, Tim, for the friendly reminder. All right. Now I am going to clean my brush, blot it. Actually, I'm going to clean it, wipe it, because I want to now add water everywhere else. So you can even add it over the bottom part of the apple. So everything that's left on this apple that doesn't yet have water, go ahead and apply water. It's okay if some of the blue bleeds into the clean water. I promise you that's okay. It'll create a bit of a green shade, which is going to be really pretty on the finished apple. And then after you've applied clean water to the rest of this apple, put some yellow on your brush. And we'll start by applying it to the upper right half of the apple. And if you need to put more yellow on your brush, you can. Just using the tip of your brush. I'm going to apply it to the bottom, even over the indentation, even over the oval at the bottom there. And you can even pull from that blue just a little bit on the left side to kind of create a little wash of green, and kind of run that along the very bottom of the apple. It'll kind of help create some form along the bottom of that apple by kind of pulling the yellow into the blue and creating that green color. It'll look more like an ochre color by the time we're good and finished with this project. Okay. But you can see already from the first layer, we're kind of building up the values, the form here. And then do you remember what was next? We took some red and we applied it over the blue, right? So let's take some red and we'll apply it over the blue, the dark value. I might pull it just a little bit to the lower left of the bottom of that apple, just a little bit there. And then I am going to go ahead and clean my brush. And I'm going to put just the tip of my brush into the red. And I'm going to apply that to the upper right, turn that orange as it sort of mixes into the yellow. It'll be a slight orange hue. And then down to the lower right of the apple. And maybe the very
Mandy, is there any way we can help someone out in the chat that they said that their apples turned purple?
So if it turned purple, you're going to want to add more red in another layer. But if you look at mine looks a little purple too. This is just the first layer. So don't worry if yours looks a little purple right now. This will just help your dark values on the apple for the next layer or so. So go ahead and blot your brush. And the last thing I'm going to do for this apple right now is I'm going to put a little bit of blue on the tip of my brush. And I'm just going to dot it once or twice on the indentation. So yes, that little oval beneath the indentation is blue right now. It won't be when we're done, but for now it's okay that it is. This is just the first layer. We're just sort of putting down the framework and developing the values, if you will. Okay. All right. So now let's tackle the leaves. The leaves are going to be simple because we're going to do exactly what I showed you in my demo exercise. I'm going to do a layer of yellow and then a layer of blue to both of these leaves. All right, so I'm going to start putting some yellow on my brush. I'm going to apply it to this upper leaf, a layer of yellow. I don't need to apply anything to the stem yet, just to the actual leaf. And then the tip of my brush in the blue, and I'll go over the yellow, and you'll see how it'll kind of take on a greenish look. If it still looks a little too blue, you can always go over it with more yellow. I just want to do thin layers, slowly build up the layers than to just kind of go for it all at once, or it could cause us to get some harsh edges on our apple, which I want to try and avoid. And then do the same thing to the bottom leaf, go over with a layer of yellow. And I didn't even bother cleaning my brush. So that little bit of blue that was still in my brush is even influencing this yellow a little bit. But that's okay. As long as we're staying within the parameters of yellow and blue, it's all going to work out. So yellow and blue for that first layer on our leaves. All right. And remember, as the colors sort of meld into each other, it'll take on more of a blue appearance. All right, so now we're going to tackle the main branch and the apple stems. And I realized I forgot to draw a little stem for this bottom apple. So I'm going to do that real quick. Just 2 parallel lines that connect to the main branch. And so I talked about there was one exception to what we're doing today as far as mixing colors through layering. When I initially made this project, if you follow me on Instagram, I posted a few weeks ago about, I showed an initial version of this where there were actually 3 apples. And I painted the brown branch in the stems by just layering red, yellow, and blue. But because we're kind of limited on time, and because some of you may be beginners, and I even still struggle, the more layers I apply to something, especially if it's something really thin, the more prone I am to making it wider than it needs to be or bigger than it should be. So to limit the number of layers we have to paint on, we are going to go ahead and mix browns in our palette, but we're still going to mix them by only using the 3 primary colors. Okay. So you can mix brown and black using the 3 primary colors. And I'm going to show you one way you can do that today. So into 2 new wells on your palette, we're going to place just 1 scoop of water. We don't need a lot of water. So just 1 scoop into 2 new wells on our palette. One of these wells is just going to be a regular middle value brown, and the other one is going to be a dark brown. It may even look more black to you, and that's okay. So for just the regular middle valued brown, we're going to do 1 pass of the cadmium yellow, 1 pass of the alizarin crimson, and 1 pass of the ultramarine blue. And that should give us a good middle valued brown. When you mix the red and yellow together, it first gives you orange, but once you put that ultramarine blue in there, look what happens. it makes it brown. Isn't that cool? So that's just one layer of each. And if you want to do like 1.5, or I said layers, 1 pass of each. If you want to do like 1.5 passes of each, you can, because mine felt just a little watered down. So, but you just want like a regular brown color by just mixing equal parts of all 3 of those colors. And then don't rinse your brush. Do not rinse your brush. Whatever brown is on your brush, just go ahead and stir that in to that other well with 1 scoop of water. And then to make it dark brown, we're going to do 1 pass of cadmium yellow, 1 pass of alizarin crimson, 2 passes of ultramarine blue. So 1 pass of cadmium yellow, 1 pass of alizarin crimson, and adding a little bit more blue is going to be what darkens it. That's why we're doing 2 passes of ultramarine blue. And you'll see it gives us a nice dark brown, even close to black, by adding just a little bit more blue than we did of the yellow and the red. All right. And if we kept adding blue to this, it would turn black. So that's how you can mix brown, and that's how you can mix black using the 3 primary colors. And then we're going to use these browns to paint the branches and the stems. And we'll also go ahead and use them a little bit on the apples in just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start by applying the lighter brown to the entire main branch. Just be real careful to stay within the lines. It's so hard for me to not be sloppy in these classes since I'm teaching and painting at the same time. So I'm going to try and be real neat here too. It's a lot easier when you're working in a quiet space and you don't have someone, even myself, me talking my own ear off. So I'm just going to carefully try. You can rotate your work if it helps you maintain control. Apply this lighter of the 2 browns to the entire main branch. Just a nice even layer of that lighter brown color. And then you don't even need to clean your brush. You could blot it if you wanted. But then what I'm going to do is with the darker brown, I'm going to apply that over the left edge. So if I'm looking at the apples, the left edge, you can let it bleed into the lighter brown as it wills. Don't force it, just let it do its thing organically. And you can go ahead and apply it to the apple stems as well. And so I'm just letting that dark brown bleed into the lighter brown organically. And then I am going to clean my brush and blot it lots of times. And then this might seem weird, but I'm going to put the tip of my brush into the red, and I'm going to apply that along the right edging, because this red just adds a nice color to the right side edge of the branch. I just really like how it looks. And then the red mixing over the brown is going to give us a really pretty dark red color. We're actually going to be mixing this color at my class on Friday to give it more of like a fall shade of red. And so what happens when we add the red over the brown, what's left on my brush, I'm going to paint on the leaf stems with. And I'm also going to go over the apple stems just one time with that red color. I just really like what it does to the branches, adding that red. It just adds some nice interest. So we added the lighter brown to the whole stem. We added the dark brown along the left edge, right along the right edge, and also to the leaf stems and to the apple branches. And you know what else I'm going to do while we're at it? Let's go ahead and put the tip of our brush into the dark brown and just place a couple dots of that on the oval on the bottom apple. We're going to have to build up the values there. So now's a good time to just go ahead and add that to the oval on the bottom apple. And you know what else, with the color that's on our brush, let's just go ahead and apply that to the leaf veining too, because when we go over the leaves with another layer in a second, it'll kind of soften this brown color and it won't look nearly as obnoxious as it will right now. So let's just go ahead and do that too. The leaves sort of have more of an organic look to them. I just sort of have fun with them. They're not the focal point of this piece. So it seems like I paint them differently every time. Really, the goal is just to have fun with them and have them look like varying shades of green by the time we're done. So I went ahead and painted on the veining on the leaves with the brownish red that was still on my brush. All right, so we're chugging along here. We are ready now for the dry brush technique. So I'm going to do a touch of demoing for you. So if you're not quite caught up, you can do that now, and then we'll be ready to sort of finish this piece up. So dry brushing, if you have never done it before. Okay, so normal watercolor mixtures like the blue here. If I were to put some blue on my brush and I were to paint a straight line, you know, it looks like this. It's nice and transparent. It's smooth. It's pretty. But dry brushing. So how you dry brush, you still need to have a little bit of water because you can't use dry half pans dry. Nothing will, if you use a dry brush and a dry half pan, nothing's going to happen. So you do need just a little bit of water on your brush, but like as little as possible. So how you start the dry brushing technique is you swish your brush in the water really good, make sure it's clean. You're going to blot your brush on a paper towel several times. It's the same start as if you were using a lift technique to sort of lift values from an area or to lift paint from an area, so that, you know, your brush is not dry, but it's not dripping and it's not soaking. It's just moist. And then you're going to run that brush several times over the half pan. I'm doing the ultramarine blue here in this case. And then when I try to paint a straight line like I did here, look what happens. It's very textured. It's very rough looking. It's not smooth. And so a lot of artists use this dry brush technique to add texture to their artwork. And some artists will use the dry brush technique as the final touch. And you could easily do this on apples to kind of add the spots and the textures of the skin. But we are going to sort of soften our dry brush today because this is likely the first time a lot of you have done it. And so it's still going to show on the final piece because this is the picture of the final piece here. And you can see a little bit of texture on the dark areas. Well, that is from the dry brushing, but the dry brushing just got softened through our final layer. Okay, so some of it's still going to show. It's just not going to be as bam, bold in your face as it will be when we do this initially. So we're going to dry brush both the ultramarine blue and the alizarin crimson over the dark areas on each apple. So we'll start with the blue. So everywhere we apply blue in the first layer, that's where we're going to do this dry brushing technique. So I'm going to actually, I need new paper towels. I bought off-brand paper towels and they are just really not absorbent. So I'm swapping them out for a fresh little layer here. And we're going to swish our brush to clean it really, really good. Blot it several times on your paper towel. I'm just sort of twisting it to blot it on all ends. And then run your brush over the ultramarine blue half pan several times. And now once again, following the curvature of the apple, I'm just going to sort of start where we applied blue initially, and I'm using fairly light pressure here. And I'm just running this dry brush over those dark values just to add a little bit of texture. So that means the bottom of the apple, what's to the left of the branch. Now be careful along the branch because it might still be a little wet. And if you put some of that water onto your brush, it will make the watercolor look smooth. And if that happens, just blot it again on your paper towel. So I'm just going everywhere we applied blue in the first step, and I'm just applying a little bit of this dry brush technique. And we're going to do the same thing to the bottom apple where we applied blue in the first step. Just apply a little bit of this dry brushing, add a little bit of texture. And then once you add the blue, you can add red over top of it, but clean your brush first or you're going to create purple for the dry brush. So clean your brush really good. You'll once again blot it several times. But instead of wiping it over the ultramarine blue half pan, you'll wipe it over the alizarin crimson half pan. And I'm just going to go over the blue with the alizarin crimson. Now, I find with the blue, I can get through the whole thing, both apples, without losing my dry brush. But with the red, I find I lose it. So what I like to do is I like to just start completely over. I'll wipe my brush, I'll blot it, and I'll run it over the half pan again to add more to my brush here. And then I'll keep with the dry brush.
Bailey, you have a question from the audience. Very good question. How do you do that if you're using paint out of the tube? Is it possible to do that technique?
People do it, but so a lot of artists, when they're working with tubes, they'll squeeze them out on their palette and they'll actually let it dry and then use it as if it were a half pan. A lot of artists do that. You'll see, like, even on Instagram, people will post a picture of their art palette and they'll have like circles on their artist palette that are dry, and they're just running their brush over it. And, you know, so it's almost like they're using it like a half pin, even though it's not. So I think that would be the best way to use a tube. I mean, obviously right now you can't really dry it, right? So I would maybe like just put a little bit on your brush, like here, maybe I can put a little bit of this red on my brush. We'll see if this works. And with the red on my brush, I'm going to blot it several times. Let's see if this works. I'm totally experimenting right now. And then I'm going to run it. Yeah, that works somewhat good. Not as good as if you were to just run it over the half pan. But that's maybe what I would do, is just blot it with the red lots of times on the paper towel.
I guess the other way to do it is you kind of have to plan in advance to know that you're going to do that technique and kind of let it sit out beforehand before you start.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I would do that. So for this bottom apple, I may do a little bit of red along the upper left half. That's more orange color, because why not? It's not like you have to only add it to the dark values. I think you could add a little bit of red to the upper right half, just wherever you want a little bit of texture, you know, but mostly to the dark values here. And again, this isn't all going to dissipate when we do the last layer, but it will, for the most part, smooth out. So this is where it doesn't have to be super neat, since we are going to kind of soften it with a final layer. If this were like the final thing you were doing, you would maybe want to be a bit more precise and careful. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to work on the last layer. I know some of you may not be done with the dry brushing, and I apologize, but I'm going to clean my brush really good here. I'm going to blot it. I'm actually going to swap out again. I do reuse my paper towels, by the way. Once they're dry, you can totally reuse them for blotting. I just use fresh ones for my classes so that it doesn't look like a sloppy workspace. All right, so I'm going to start by applying red over everywhere I applied the dry brushing on this apple. Okay, so everywhere I did the dry brushing, so over the dark values, I'm going to apply pure red. We're not doing water first this time for this second layer. And I'm really not scrubbing at it either to try and smooth the dry brushing. I'm just going over it with the red, and I'm going to let it soften on its own, which will happen. Just kind of let it do its thing. And sorry, I have to twist my work here to not go over the branch accidentally. And put more red on your brush, however often is needed, to kind of cover this whole area with red. So that's, I applied dry brushing everywhere we applied blue on that very first step. So that's where I'm applying red now.
And as you're doing, I'm just going to let everybody know that the class is being recorded first. So for those who might have to leave and go to another class, Mandy will continue until she's finished here, a couple minutes past the hour if necessary. But I encourage you to go back onto the YouTube channel, Michael's site, to get the replay if you're not able to see the completion of this project.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, with the red still on my brush, I'm going to place the tip of it in the yellow, and I'm going to apply yellow to what's left. And it's going to be more of an orange since the red was already on the brush. And if some of your red started to dry, you can sort of run it along the hard edge to smooth that out. And I'm going to apply some to the middle here. And I'm going to apply some to the indentation now. And would you guys look at just like that? This looks a lot more like this, doesn't it? Just with that second layer of applying red. I'm going to sort of let this set for just a second before we make final adjustments. I'm actually going to add some brown, I think, to the darkest values, but let's go ahead and repeat this process to the bottom apple. So I'm going to clean my brush because we're starting fresh here and blot it. All right, so I'm going to start with pure red. I'm going to apply it over where I applied the dry brushing, the blue dry brushing. We're going to start with the blue, the dark layers here. So just go over the blue dry brushing with the red. Again, we're not trying to smooth the dry brushing, just go over it. It'll soften on its own. And then the tip of the brush in the yellow, and apply that to the upper right half of this apple. So don't really work on the bottom part of the apple yet. You could go ahead and apply this orangish color down to the lower right And you could even apply a little bit to the lower left of this apple. But I really want what's below the indentation to be a lighter value than what's above it. So after you apply the orange to the upper right of the apple and the very lower left and very lower right of the apple, go ahead and clean your brush. And then I'm going to apply yellow, just yellow without any red on it to the bottom, but I'm going to be careful and work around that oval where we applied the dark brown. And then can you guess what we're going to apply to the oval? More dark brown. We're just trying to build up the values there. And you can kind of twirl the yellow into the surrounding colors to sort of deepen the values where the yellow is along the bottom of the apple. But boy, that's so pretty. I just love how that looks. All right, so cleaned and blotted my brush. And I'm going to just put a little bit of that dark brown. I'm going to place a few more dots of that on the circle. And it's okay if some of it bleeds out. If it bleeds out a little too much, you can use your paper towel to sort of lift just a little. But I love how that looks. All right. And if some of it dries, you can always blot your brush lots of times so it's barely wet and then sort of push color around if you need to. Sometimes that's necessary. You just have to learn how to kind of control the water, if you will. Okay, so let's do the last layer to the leaves. So to the leaves, I'm going to do the same thing I did the first time. I'm going to start with yellow. I'm going to apply yellow to the entirety of the leaf. And this is going to soften that brown veining we put on. Then I'm going to go over it with blue. And you'll see how that just sort of softens the veining. It makes it look a little more natural. This is a little bit different than how the written instructions say to do the leaves. Either one is right. I just kind of have fun with the leaves and they kind of look more abstract. Sometimes I even put just a little bit of red on the leaves because the red and the green make like a dark green color. So if I put just a touch of red on my brush, kind of drop that in and move it around, it sort of takes on more of a dark green color and just adds a little bit of interest. And sometimes I'll even do a little bit of lifting in between the veining. So you do that by starting off exactly how we did with the dry brush, where you swish your brush, you blot it lots of times on the paper towel, and then you just move that brush where you want to lift color and blot it and lift, blot and lift, blot and lift. And that can kind of create some form in between some of the veins if you want to do that. And we can do the same thing to this bottom leaf down here. I'll start with yellow. Maybe I want this one to be a little more on the yellow side. So I'm going to try and add more yellow, less blue. So I get more of a blue-green than more of a teal color by just adding a little bit less blue. This one looks like a slightly different shade of green, or I could even add a little bit more blue just along the top, but keep it more yellow-green along the bottom. And then I can once again lift in between any veining that I want, just to sort of create a little more value and form. These are all little techniques you can do to sort of make this project your own. And then the last thing, or not the last thing, but one more thing I want to do real quick is I want to add one more layer of dark brown along the left edge of the main branch. So the dark brown we have here, I'm going to add a little more dark brown right along the left edge. And then just sort of smooth that over to the rest of the branch. I'm going to do the start of a lip technique or the start of a dry brush technique, where I'm going to swish my brush in the water. I'm going to blot it several times, and then I'm just going to smooth. So this is another watercolor technique. I'm just smoothing the edge of the brown to cover the rest of the branch. And you'll see how it just sort of slightly transitions it over and allows there to be different values on that branch by just sort of smoothing it over. And you could even do a little bit of lifting right through the middle of the branch if you wanted, for there to be like a lighter value or for there to be a highlight. And I think we have time. It's 2:56. So the last thing I want to do is I just want to add a little bit more. I want to add a little bit of brown to the apples and then maybe make an adjustment with the reds. So I'm going to take some of the dark brown into the darkest values on the apples. So to this top apple, it's kind of going to be what's to the right. I'm just going to place a few strokes. What's to the right of the main stem, what's just to the left of the main stem, maybe a little bit along the bottom and a little bit along the left side edge. And for this bottom apple, I'm just going to add a little bit along the left side. So I'm just doing kind of broad strokes here. I'm not trying to smooth it all out or make it an even color. And then I'm not even going to clean my brush. I'm just going to place the tip of it in the green. And then I'm going to kind of go over those parts with the red to just sort of transition that color in. So this is going to add a little more red to the brush, but it's also going to create a bit of a darker value. And if you run out of water on your brush, you can always just put a little bit of water on it. But I think this adds a really nice finishing touch and gets just one more value in there, which I think kind of gives it a nice kind of finished look by just doing some kind of broad strokes of dark brown and then a little bit of red over it to kind of smooth it out. And then if you need to smooth it out further, blot your brush lots of times and then just kind of apply it over the edges of the paint color to smooth it and transition it into everything that is around it or nearby. So I hope that kind of makes sense. You can always add more yellow to the bottom of the apple if you want to add a little more pop of a color. And I think this part here needs just a little bit of smoothing out. And you can always put a little more dark brown on your brush and just dot it onto that bottom oval to just make it look more detailed. All right, so that is the apples. I know that was like a fire hose version, and I feel like all my classes tend to be a fire hose version. But I have good news for you. My class on Friday is super beginner friendly. I'm going to pull that over and I'm going to show you because I told you I would, and I finally am. So it's this Hello Fall wreath. And the outline for this class is just the lettering and a circle. This is meant to be really loose and imperfect. And so we're going to be freehand painting all of the elements, and we'll be practicing the elements before we actually work on the wreath. And it's sort of a progressive thing where we're just going to sort of work counterclockwise, start here, paint on this oak leaf and then the seed pods and this wheat or grain, what would you call that, stalk? And then pumpkin. We're just kind of going to work counterclockwise around. So this is a really beginner friendly. It's not detailed. It's meant to be loose and imperfect looking. So that is Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then on October 5th, whoops, let me start my video here. On October 5th, I'm going to be teaching this Halloween class where this is going to be more of an abstract technique, and we'll be using water blooms and drips to create the crow and the black cat and the bats with the moon in the background. So this will be October 5th, same time as this class, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And before we all say goodbye today, I would just love to see your finished apples. If you had time to paint along with me, I know it was a really fast class, but if you could hold your apples up so that I can see what you're able to do today. You see, I have to move my view to gallery view so I can have oh, those apples look gorgeous. Oh my word. I am so impressed. Every time I'm just blown away. I cannot even believe it. So many of you.
Great job, everyone. Those look awesome.
Oh, they're just gorgeous. I love to call these like heritage or antique apples. I think they just have that sort of like old American feel to them, what our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents grew in their yards before they were kind of like commercialized. And now all you can find is like Red Delicious and Granny Smith. So if you guys have followed me for a while, you know I'm like really into gardening and homesteading. So I have some antique apple trees in my own yard. So this is like near and dear to my heart. But if you guys don't already, feel free to follow me on social media. My handle is Mandy Peltier Artist, and my website is mandypeltier.com. If you want to watch any of the other classes I've taught or written projects that I've written, they're all on my website with direct links to where you can actually view the class or the project. So also feel free to email me a picture of your finished apples. I just saw like literally like a little square of them. I'd love to see them larger. So feel free to email me. You can do that through my website. There's a contact tab there, or you can just tag me on social media. But it was great spending this hour with you, and I hope I see a lot of you on Friday. Thank you.